So welcome to Let's Talk Climate and today's topic, how community leaders moved conservative-leaning Utah to act on climate. We appreciate you being with us. Our guests today are Sarah Wright, Executive Director, and Josh Kraft, Government Relations Director for Utah Clean Energy. Welcome to both of our guests.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for ecoAmerica for hosting us, inviting us to share some of our story.
Well, we are looking forward to hearing it. And Utah Clean Energy has been doing great things. I get your newsletter. I see all the activity going on. And you have been able to move the entire state of Utah forward on clean energy. You know, I remember 5 years ago, you could hardly even say the word climate change in Utah. People weren't talking about it. And now, you know, fast forward to a couple of months ago, and you hosted this tremendous signing event for the Utah Climate and Clean Air Compact. You had Republicans and Democrats, elected leaders, business leaders, who all signed on to this compact. And so I know that there are folks from around the country who are watching who want to hear, you know, your secret sauce. Tell us the story about how you engage the community in starting in Salt Lake City and then moving into the entire state to get to that group of leaders and then that tipping point to really be supportive of clean energy, even in a state that is producing fossil fuels.
Sure, Jennifer, I'll start, and Josh, please chime in. I guess there are a few things to think about when you're trying to make big change, and in a conservative state or anywhere, is first, I think you need to be fearless somewhat, and you need to believe that you can succeed, and you need to believe in the humanity and the shared values, that you can break through, and that's regardless of your political affiliation or your understanding on climate, that there is the shared values. And I want to give a shout out to ecoAmerica because you've done so much work on understanding values and understanding how to talk about climate change, but believing that you can succeed and having the patience to move forward is really critical. And in 2016 is when Utah Clean Energy has been working on climate since 2001. But in 2016, after the election, is when we really saw the need to have conservative states step out and to be pragmatic leaders to advance discussions that, you know, cross partisan lines so that we can have impactful solutions. So how we did it is we started small, and we realized back in 2010 or something, if for those of you who have seen it, the publication, The Tragedy of the Risk Perception Commons, there's something in that, Khan and some others wrote it, but there's something in that about that people look to their leaders for what's okay to speak out on, to have positions. And while we think that grassroots work is incredibly important, at that time in Utah, we decided to go after the leaders and to have them help us spread the gospel, if you will, on the need to take action. And we didn't start big. Just shortly after that time, we had the pleasure of meeting Bob Perkowitz and working with Salt Lake City. And there was a goal to have Salt Lake City be a path to positive community, but we knew as a conservative state that we just couldn't bring the blue city of Salt Lake along. We had to bring the entire state. So it took time and patience. And we started also in small groups because having leaders feel safe when they're starting to learn about climate is really critical. And another thing that ecoAmerica talks about is sort of meeting people where they are on their understanding of climate. And so by bringing together small groups, and some people say that science doesn't carry the day, but what we did is, I think Utah has one of the best climate communicators in the country, and it's Dr. Rob Davies from the land grant school here, Utah State. And we brought together small groups where they could ask questions of their peers. It was so they would feel safe. And then after they understood the urgency, they started helping us enroll more leaders. We launched Path to Positive Utah. Utah's kind of a state that likes to be their own thing. So we ended up taking it beyond Path to Positive Utah to launch the Climate Compact, which is based on some principles on some research that was done by the University of Utah on the steps that we need to take to advance air quality and climate at the same time. And for those of you that don't know Utah, we do have some air quality problems. So tying those two together was really helpful. That's a really quick summary of sort of how we launched, but I would say fearlessness, believing you can succeed, and understanding that we all have shared values. We care about our kids, we care about our grandkids, and not writing people off that that they're not going to care about climate.
I think I remember hearing the introduction of one speech, maybe it was at a conference in Utah, where they said something about the values that Utahns have. And I remember one of them was, we love our family, we love independence, and we don't want to be California.
They're all things I think we hear regularly. And I will add that, if we, I'm someone who's still newish to Utah, but I worked with, Sarah was kind enough to bring me into our team. And I do think that there's some things in retrospect that we had a running start. And I can't emphasize enough the need to root things in values that are connect with everybody in your community. And so environmental stewardship, even though Utah is a politically conservative state and sometimes quite politically conservative, but care deeply about our outdoors. We have a visible air quality challenge. And so that has helped, I think, to pull folks in. We have a lot of businesses who operate internationally and some tech companies, a large mining company, but they've always had a passion and interest in clean energy and solar. There's I think, an interest in among folks who may be somewhat politically conservative in energy independence. So rooftop solar has been something that I think was popular even before climate. We necessarily had a critical mass talking about climate change. And then of course we have a ski industry and a recreation industry that is sensitive to the impact that climate change will have on the future. Not to mention the kind of water challenges that we'll have here in terms of water quality and water availability. So I think those aren't. I think it's just an illustration of there are things like that in almost every community. And I think Sarah had Utah Clean Energy built up a lot of relationships over time, but there were a lot of strands to draw upon. And then I'll just finally say that give a shout out to our partners and friends at the Citizens Climate Lobby who've done a lot of grassroots work trying to do outreach on climate. And I think that, that has helped to have leaders like Senator Mitt Romney and Congressman John Curtis be some of the more vocal Republicans, which has helped to give momentum to a lot of this work, and vice versa. So we have a kind of a positive circle going on.
One of the things that you notice if you look at the Path to Positive Utah website and your leaders is that not only did you try to get diverse ideologically, but also diverse in terms of sector and profession. And so I noticed there's some pastors and of course business people, bankers. And so I'm wondering, as you built that group of leaders to, kind of lead the way, how consciously did you think about, okay, what sector is missing? Do we have a doctor, a medical doctor? How much was that part of your initial, strategy?
Well, we were very deliberate on our recruitment, especially early on, because we wanted everyone to feel like they had a place. And we also wanted to make sure we just didn't get the usual suspects there. So that's important. And then in addition to what you said, we want to also make sure that, and this is hard because Utah, there aren't a lot of groups that represent different communities of color and that we've been able to tap into yet, but we wanted to make sure that there was equity, racial equity, as many churches that we could get, all the different business sectors. We wanted it to feel like everyone had a seat at the table and driving this, solution forward.
And we can also say that I think that, creating for everyone else, if you're looking for lessons from Utah, I think that creating a safe space is something that we have, regularly heard from folks who were interested and engaged. Sarah and some others organized a ski day where folks came together and skied and then talked about climate and how we might work together way back in early 2017, Sarah, or 2016. Yeah, and so it's been a few years, and I think that there at the time there was some not very positive statements from the legislature, which I think everyone kind of was looking over their shoulder about. Okay, we don't want to come out individually, and I think that so in addition to diversifying the voice of this isn't because the climate change, of course, is an economic issue, it's a social issue, it's our community. So having voices that represent that's critically important. But I think also having folks come out together in a safe tent with business, with religious leaders, along with some well-known, well-respected community leaders has just been, I think that's the central point in us building, momentum to get some, continue to grow.
Well, that's really, that's a brilliant idea to have a ski day to talk about climate change, because not only do you enjoy it and have fun, build community, but it's relevant and tangible. It's like right there, people can see these slopes are not going to have snow on them if we keep on warming our planet. This is something that I know you've been able to measure in terms of the snowpack and the length of time, the trend. And so that's a great example of how people can make it relevant and real and touch
some of our friends in Southwest Florida or South Carolina may not be able to have a ski day, but there's certainly a sailing day or a day at the beach or something. It's definitely an equivalent everywhere. So.
That's right. I had the sunny day, flooding day. Let's go wait on the street. And you're right that there are examples all over the country of ways that you can really show people this is how it's impacting you. And the other thing that I know that you all have done is work in individual communities. I think that there are 23 communities now that have signed on for clean energy, 100% clean by 2030. And those are, various demographics and ideological, perspectives. And so I'm wondering, how do you really engage those communities that are, in different places and across Utah? What are some of the things that you were able to do to move that process?
Josh, why don't you take that?
Yeah, well, I think for everyone who's here, Utah has a really unique law on the books that we passed a couple years ago called the Community Renewable Energy Act, which allows communities that are served by our big utility, it's a big utility, Rocky Mountain Power, to purchase, in effect, as a community, a net 100% renewable energy. So it's not a voluntary purchase program, it's not an offset program, it's actually buying new, the thought is primarily utility scale renewable energy resources and then perhaps some demand side resources and batteries to accompany that. And they can choose to do that again as a community, and individual ratepayers, customers can opt out if they want. And as far as we know, it's an innovative and experimental, really kind of cool piece of legislation. And it's very much still in the implementation phase. But they're looking for how to do the rate to make this happen. I think that, but we were really surprised. Communities had between April of 2019 and December of 2019 to decide whether they were going to move forward in this process. And it was that element of citizen engagement, public interest in talking to city council members and mayors that I think really propelled these 23 communities. It's 20 cities and towns and then 3 counties to choose to move forward in the process. And so we had some folks who definitely not, they weren't all island sort of left-leaning progressive communities that chose to take this step. And I think we were surprised at how many folks chose to go to the next round. I think whatever happens with the exact implementation, we don't know how many cities will remain actually doing a purchase at the end of the day. But I think it's given the utility and state policymakers a real sense that people want clean energy. They really want clean energy. If you're in West Jordan, in Ogden, in some of the more rural communities not too far from Park City. They want clean energy, and I think that's going to influence how we buy energy here in the future. It's really cool, but also just again that the chance that people. I don't know that I foresaw that many people would want to engage in this process. It's pretty awesome to see it.
Well, and I know that because I get your emails, I know that you explain that kind of legislation really well to people so they understand, what the opportunity is, et cetera. But did you also hold in person? I know it was before COVID. So did you hold in-person meetings and kind of go around and work with citizens or leaders, or kind of how did that all work out?
We spent a lot. We spent a lot of time with city councils and community councils and members, and I'll just say that we to some extent we think that we supported HB 411, the act. We really let the communities really take the lead in selling this, along with some more grassroots organizations, to their community members. We wanted to have a sort of explanatory, impartial role, but also Salt Lake City, Park City, Summit County, Grand County, and then some unexpected leaders in smaller cities here like Ogden and West Jordan. They really took the lead, and I think that is something that was so. I know it's important to have your city leaders, your local leaders, kind of take that first step to be the voices. I think in the front. I think that really helped to kind of let it know that it wasn't an advocate-led process, that it was the communities themselves who wanted to lead on this purchase, and we wanted to be a technical and community resource, and that's I think where we stood, and still are today. But it's been again exciting to see people are hungry for something different.
You're talking about exciting. I think of innovation, and I need to bring in a little bit of current news to this webcast, and it's something I read in the New York Times this past week that featured an apartment complex in Salt Lake City, because this complex has gone 100% zero carbon. It's totally clean energy, and they use that as a selling point. They use the battery storage that each apartment has as a marketing tool because it's reliable, and also, of course, the environmental appeal. And the complex is called a virtual power plant. And I'm just going to read from it's the Soleil Loft website. Virtual power plants that are known as VPPs take multiple independent energy sources from different locations, like the batteries in each apartment, and combine them into a power network. VPPs are designed to relieve stress on the grid by distributing power from independent resource during peak load times. They're controlled by software, and the battery systems are accessible to the utility, to Rocky Mountain Power. And this relationship between the Soleil Lofts and the local utility is what makes it it's really kind of unique, because Rocky Mountain Power will manage the battery system as a virtual power plant. And this is interesting because sometimes solar companies and power companies don't always see eye to eye and work together this well, but this is a great example. Rocky Mountain Power can deploy 50% of the combined power of all the community's batteries to offset stress on the grid during peak hours. And so one of the officials from the company says, when demand for power goes up, instead of firing up a fossil fuel plant hundreds of miles away, Rocky Mountain Power has stored sunlight ready for instantaneous response. And so I just thought that was a great piece of news to bring forward. I mean, you all are Utah Clean Energy, but it's innovative. It's showing that positive power of really looking at clean energy and continuing to market that. And so my question is, I mean, it is kind of unique. Can people in other states maybe try to bring this up with their utility? Was Rocky Mountain Power really that different? And do you see this happening in more parts of Utah as well? And this, you may not know the answer, but I just thought it was an interesting piece of innovation that may not be possible in other places.
Well, I would think it would be possible anywhere. Another bit of Utah Clean Energy's work is we spend a lot of time before the Public Service Commission, who regulates the utilities, you have to find a model that works for the utility economically and for the renter or condo. And in addition to this program, it's still starting and it will probably need some refinement, but Rocky Mountain Power, which is part of Berkshire Hathaway Energy, is offering incentives for homeowners with solar to put storage in that then they can also control. So I think helping your utility and helping your utility regulators understand innovation, how the grid is changing, and how the consumer side of the system can have a real role in the success. I'm definitely bullish that we could go a lot farther. You know, I won't sugarcoat it. Our utility is also fighting rooftop solar at the same time. They're doing some of these innovative things, but it just goes to show that, you know, you can find common ground and move forward some really cool projects. And it's great that that's getting coverage in the New York Times, you know. We were excited to see that. And it's big. It's a 600 unit apartment complex. So.
And some beautiful photos of the apartments and then the mountains, snow-capped mountains behind them. Terrific. That's
I think we could also add that, you know, that, yeah, I think that the fight, we certainly see that this fight over rooftop solar distributed energy resources, it's a challenge that is in it. We do see, I would have to say, you know, Rocky Mountain Power has put in a large purchase for some utility scale resources and batteries, but they're also been interested in electrification in our of our heating and cooling systems and our transportation systems. And so we won't always see eye to eye with them on those, even the implementation of those things, but those are common grounds that I think even some more traditional utilities in you know, more conservative states that, you know, pull common ground that we can seek out and pull upon to as we do decarbonization and, you know, try to have to, as we change our energy system. We're seeing, but it's good to see a lot of that here in the Solar Lofts project is a nice illustration of, we hope to see more Solar Lofts here too.
Yeah, I hope by talking about it today, maybe we'll get people in other parts of the country to start thinking about ways that they can be innovative and get more of that solar and battery storage out there. I had a question come in from somebody in Charleston, South Carolina, Tasha, and it kind of works into another one I was going to ask. They want to know what words or techniques you use to connect with people, and especially across party lines, you know, to be all inclusive. And part of that is, can you name some things to keep in mind when you're talking, you know, to conservative and progressive communities, and maybe some of the do's and don'ts that you've learned along the way?
I'll start, Josh, but you should chime in. One thing we didn't do is we didn't shy away from talking about climate change, which some people advised us to do. And we determined early on that this had to be front and center and part of the conversation. So we didn't shy away from that. Although we often tied it to conditions. So when you're talking to ranchers, you talk about how, you know, do you see that there's, you know, less water now, and try, or snowpack, or just tie it to the things that the people that you're working with care about. Stewardship is a big word. I mean, Utah is known for caring about stewardship. So that's something that we talked about, but you know, I'm not sure of exactly which words. It's really more about listening and talking about trying to find the shared values. And there are probably some words that shut people down, but I think listening with an open heart and really hearing what they're saying and not writing anyone off is more important than the actual words. But Josh.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we went through some of this in terms of, you know, I think it's the hardest work was getting a critical mass of leaders and creating that safe space of folks who weren't environed, you know, at the beginning. And I think that if you're that's something that took while we launched Path to Positive Utah with 40 leaders. And I would say that, you know, we were able to build, and then we launched the Utah Climate and Clean Air Compact with about 120 leaders. And so those are, that work is tremendously important. I think that starting with those, rooting in values that are recognizable to your community, and don't be too particular. I think we had a balance of wanting to make sure that people talked about climate change. Using the words climate change is really important. At the same time, linking it to values that weren't about climate, were about stewardship, community, the health of the economy, helped to kind of broaden out the message and kind of went away from the politics, so the controversy of that a little bit. And I think that those were all. I guess I would just say, if there was a kind of a don't. I think I think we would found that don't start by necessarily focusing on specific policy initiatives or trying to create a policy coalition. I think starting off a little bit slower we obviously, Utah Clean Energy, we do a ton of policy work. That is, we are policy ones, we have public policy, but asking folks to endorse like a carbon price or a clean electricity standard as a starting point, I think that would have been a lot less effective than starting in more broadly about, hey, this is climate, what's it going to mean for our future? Engage in this conversation with us. And I think that is likely to resonate. And then to repeat, everyone who talks about conservative audiences, finding religious leaders, military leaders, and business leaders always helps to, change, make sure it's seen as a nonpartisan initiative.
Yeah, the word that Sarah used, stewardship, is certainly one that religious leaders use, creation care, stewards of the earth and the planet. And I think that is very cross-cutting, and many different faiths and traditions, and even people who aren't in a specific named religion will talk about stewardship and creation care for their children, the moral obligation for our future, for our children and grandchildren, that's part of that perspective. And I want to also bring in, we talk about relevance and how we engage people with things they can see. I think about when I was out there and we were doing a Climate for Health ambassador program, the picture of the inversion over Salt Lake and how you can see the smog, you can really see the dirty air. And I know that one of the things that it's called the Climate and Clean Air Compact. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how that came about, how you're using that clean air as part of that. And if, the lack of activity during COVID, when people could see that it was clear again, if that kind of helped bring your message home. Either one.
I'll start. The clean air is a point that everyone feels, and in the wintertime we do have some pretty significant problems here sometimes as far as air quality. And some of our climate and clean air compact leaders worked with the Utah legislature to actually pay for analysis by a program by the University of Utah Gardner Policy Institute to make a roadmap to address climate and clean air. And they tied those together in their ask. And so when we did our climate and clean air compact, we moved from our Path to Positive initiative, community of Utah, which really was just about asking them to talk about climate change. And that was our initial, like Josh said, into a program that actually had some asks, like support these principles and these types of actions for moving forward. And the fact that air quality and climate were tied together, and the solutions to air quality are often solutions to climate, and they're very linked, was really helpful for us here to tie them together.
And you get those twofers, right? You have it's certainly electric vehicles are popular here. We had a big debate about EV fees during the legislative session that we defeated. And I think that the fact that there's an impact in air quality, public transportation, I think, it's a challenging time with COVID, but just to tie in there that one unexpected, and I think it's hard to say silver lining with the pandemic, but a kind of silver lining that we've seen in terms of our policy response was that there's been a long time interest in the benefits of telecommuting. And that has gone from kind of a marginal tool, I think, to almost a central tool, and has been very popular with our then lieutenant governor, who's now our governor, in part because of air quality and in part because it can help folks move to rural areas and do more work in rural Utah, have some beneficial economic development impacts. And so I think that that's one thing that will stay, and I think has changed at least my perspective on some of what the tools can, can be. And so there's those nice connections that they're, that's a central part of the climate compact, is that, again, the solutions to climate change and air quality, they're not always the same cause, but a lot of the solutions are shared, and I think that works in a lot of places.
I noticed when you were talking about the Gardner Institute at the university that you had, I know you have the Weber State Sustainability Summit and some other things. The universities have been very important. And I think that, there are folks listening from around the country that know that your local university can be a great source of support when you're trying to get good information from people who actually are climate scientists. But there's a great question in the chat from William who asks, what's the role going forward? And how do you plan to continue to work with universities as you spread the message and get more people engaged?
So the question was how we work with universities?
And what are your plans to continue to work with them in the future? Like, what are some of the things that are planned where you're going to really be working with them? I know that.
Josh, you want to?
Well, I think I'll start by saying that, our universities as energy users have been innovators. And, so the University of Utah inked one of the first contracts for additional renewable energy. They bought some to offset about 50% of their on-campus power use. They worked very hard with the utility to get that done. Weber State University in Ogden has this really amazing energy efficiency heating and cooling project that they've displayed all across the state. So if you go there, they've done these tours. It's hard to do that right now. And then they have also, I think, been the folks who have, like the cities, have been incubators for some of the ideas. Weber State, their Intermountain Sustainability Summit, is a leading conference here that sort of brings practitioners together around sustainability issues, including climate. And I think that they're, and we partner with them. The way we're going to work with them more closely is through the, not only the Climate Compact, but we have what we call the Utah Climate Action Network here. And so just to take advantage of that range of practitioners who are, share with their students, share with the community best practices, around climate and clean energy. And I think that those are, and I'll just say that I'll give one more shout out to the Utah Valley University, which inked a deal recently with Salt Lake City and the ski areas to help power a lot of their facilities with a solar facility that's actually out in Tooele County, a more rural area. So again, I think that as energy users, as incubators, they're critical. I don't know, they're critical partners, and been a spark for some of the work that we're doing here.
Absolutely, and that's such a great point to make, that they're implementing the clean energy solutions and then showing it off and inviting people to come see and doing the tour is really helps people imagine, understand, and they can measure what they're saving, not just their greenhouse gas reduction, but also energy savings, et cetera. And that's, those are hard facts. Like you can't dispute those. So that's a really, another great reason why things like the Soleil apartment, et cetera, need to show off what they're doing to give people those ideas. I think, I can't remember if it was, oh, go ahead, Josh, you got something
Well,
else?
I was going to say, I think that I know that questioner pretty well. And so I wanted just to, before I forget, that universities, of course, house young people. And so I'll just, that's an important part. In general, both people who are identified as conservative and liberal all over the country, but in Utah is no exception, have been leaders on climate and pulling that up front. And I'll just say that I can't speak for all the presidents of our universities, particularly our public universities, who always have to examine where the state and the culture and politics are at when they talk about these things. But it's been interesting, and it's a hopeful sign, I think, that they are looking at their students, what their students are asking for, and speaking more openly about climate and feeling more comfortable doing that. And I think that's a shift that the young people are driving, and it's been helpful. It's been cool to see the partnership there, that they're excited now that their students are engaged, I think, to speak more openly about climate solutions. So.
Well, yeah, the youth movement is very important to what's going on with climate change. And, I think about one of the things that our Let's Talk Climate guides and resources talk about is using your authentic voice. And when you're a young person, you're going to be here in 2050. Everybody's aiming toward this clean energy by 2050. Well, if we don't get there, the young people are the ones who are going to be experiencing, the full impact of that. And so they have that authentic voice about this is real and this is going to impact my future and my life. And so that, I think that adds that sense of being trusted messengers to their passion and their commitment. So good point to bring that up about universities. Absolutely. And they have been great partners around the country in different states with climate action and climate change. So that's important. Another thing that you talked a little bit about is the public-private partnerships. And so we had Laura from Atlanta wanted to know about any more examples. I know you've talked about apartments and some of the businesses that are actually employing or using solar, et cetera. What other kinds of partnerships? I know you have bankers on your leadership group and that kind of thing. So tell us about a few more of those that have been helpful.
I mean, one way they've been helpful is just being able to help share the message and to reach a whole nother group of their peers. And this is going to sound really bad, but it's sort of almost like a pyramid scheme. I mean, because you reach one group, like you reach a couple respected bankers, and then they can share the message and share the understanding of climate urgency with all of them. But I'm trying to think of some specific projects or programs, and I'm drawing a blank. Josh, do you have any?
Think about the ripples that a stone thrown in a pond makes. Like you're making ripples and helping spread the message. But absolutely.
The project that, there's been a lot of attention. Another project that our utility has been involved with that's gotten a lot of attention is the work of a company called Give Development. And they've put together, they are working hard to try to build affordable housing that is zero emissions. Not on just affordable housing, but new housing. And housing is, of course, like we are a rapidly growing state that is experiencing a lot of growing pains. And so finding that, I think that's one area where, along, not only transit-oriented development, but the buildings themselves, where we're seeing a lot of folks take an interest. Public policy is tremendously important there. We need good codes, we need good standards. National policies, maybe a carbon price wouldn't hurt to help, but to help pull things along. But I think that's an area where folks are looking to to innovate and to have a role in from the bottom up, from the business perspective.
And we, some concrete things that we've done is certain times when we've needed to educate the governor or the legislature or a regulator, bringing the business community and the voices and having joint sign-on letters and just kind of some of the typical sort of advocacy work, having those business voices carries a lot of weight with decision makers when they see that it's not just the typical advocacy groups that want this, but the industry and the business leaders want it as well.
And I think that's true no matter where you are in the country, is to know your business culture and the folks who are the leaders. I mean, I'm based in Charlotte, we're a banking town. And so you have to get bankers involved with whatever, you're getting done. because they do lead, and they can support things. And you're right, in those peer groups, it makes a big difference. So I want to ask, what's the next big thing? What are some of your plans? And Bob asked this in the chat, but what keeps you energized? What are your plans in the coming year? Things that you want to get accomplished now that you've got this momentum?
Well, one, we launched our climate compact during, the COVID pandemic, and I'm excited to be able to meet with our leaders in person. But we, on the 24th of this month, we're hosting a meeting on carbon pricing. So we're starting to take our compact leaders to a next step of education to help them understand, they want to do something, they understand the urgency, but now it's time to start educating on what are some, and having conversations about what are the options, what we can do next. We've also, another meeting that will, there's also interest in how this is going to benefit, economics and job creation and innovation. So we'll be hosting another meeting on that probably in the next quarter. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities to have these leaders' voices be heard on the infrastructure package, on carbon pricing, and how can we help our leaders understand the options and help get the voice out that Utahns, we care about these issues and we want to see the solutions move forward. So really it's about engaging our leaders and becoming more active together as a group.
Yeah, I'd say that it's been great to see that people over, even during the pandemic, I think we're starting to see more folks come to us and, or at least come to our climate compact leaders and ask how they can be engaged. And I think that keeps me energized. I also think, to Sarah's point about the federal level, we think about Utah as a clean energy state with a ton of untapped potential. At the same time, we are a traditional energy. We have a lot of coal, we have a lot of oil and gas industry here. And so it's going to be a tricky dialogue about our energy transition and what happens. I think it's good not to paper over that. Like, these things are, we have a very diverse economy, so I don't think there's anything to fear about this transition. But I will say that I think we look forward to that, how we can work with our, congressional delegation and our leaders to position Utah to benefit from what will almost certainly be a time of investment and change at the national level. Both Senator Romney and Congressman John Curtis have been very vocal about wanting to do something about climate and being active on that front. And so I think that, we look forward to working with them and working with the new administration and those businesses and our leaders here to, shape things in a way that I think will benefit the climate, but also benefit our state. So I think that's something that's exciting and a big part of our, we hope to be our climate work over the next year with our leaders.
So what's it going to take to get the next license plate to say Utah, the clean energy state?
There was Jennifer, there was a robust debate about special license plates during the legislative session. I know that Representative Joe Briscoe's here, so maybe I can work with him to have to introduce that license plate, or maybe just an energy state, and I can have solar, and then something else on the other side, so we can be all, but nonetheless, I think that's a good idea. See what we can do.
Always try, right? Always. Yeah. You mentioned one thing, and we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to just play on one thing that you mentioned, and that is the just transition. As jobs leave fossil fuel and go to wind and solar and other clean energy, or go into something else entirely. How much of an issue is that in the just transition, and the ideas around equity, inclusion, and keeping everybody in mind as you become the clean energy state?
It's critical, and it's critical in urban areas, and it's critical in our rural areas that are transitioning away from fossil fuels, and um, figuring out how not to presume that we have all the answers, but to be able to work with these communities and explore and hear what's needed, and making sure that all those voices are at the table as we move forward on solutions. We can't, if we try to solve climate change and ignoring the communities that are impacted, we're not going to come to the best solutions. So I think it's a critical part.
Yeah, we have those, and I think that it's present here. All of those strands of, we have rural coal communities in rural Utah. Those are primarily white communities, but we also have, and the same is true to some extent in Wyoming. But we also have Native communities who have some of that infrastructure, Navajo and Hopi communities, and they also have energy access issues. And so there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of hope. It's good. It's exciting again to be able to engage in these, but they're different. So many layers to this challenge, and so but nonetheless opportunities too. So.
Absolutely. There are many layers. It's intersectional, and you have to multi-solve and looking at a lot of different issues at once. So we're glad that Utah is in good hands with Utah Clean Energy. Your work is tremendous and you're inspirational. I see stuff in the chat about, oh, I'm so inspired and energized. I'm going to go and try to be more aspirational and clean energy in different places in our country. So thank you so much for your wonderful work. Do you have one last thing to say, what gives you hope going forward before we close out? One last positive thing for our listeners. I know it's all been positive.
I mean, I'll say the youth movement gives me hope. I mean, all of the work that we're doing, but then having the movement of the youth and figuring out how that we can support them, because they're moving, but it's sad that they have to do so much work. But the voice, just having their voice is huge.
Yeah, and I think that I'll just add that I think because of that, and because of I think that it's amazing to see the number of voices now speaking up on climate here in Utah, and so I think that that's something that we're gonna, we're fortunate to be at the center of, engaged in, but it's growing, and it's much different than it was a few years back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's great to see the engagement. As we say at ecoAmerica, start with people, stay with people. Absolutely, because people make all the difference. Josh and Sarah, it has been such a delight to speak with you both. And I'm feeling very energized as well. And I know that our listeners are. I just want to say once again, thank you so much for joining us today. And we just wish you every luck in continuing to move Utah forward in a just and inclusive way on clean energy. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks. It's great to partner with you. So
thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, ecoAmerica, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. It's been fun.
indeed.
Look forward to continuing that. And our Let's Talk Climate series continues next week. Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Our next episodes, the next one will be on March 18th, Climate of Health and Hope, New Opportunities for Health Professionals. And then on April the 8th, we have Local Action, Personal Benefits, Why You'll Want a 15-Minute City, and How to Get One. So you can engage with us online with Let's Talk Climate, hashtag Let's Talk Climate. Be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest thought leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. And from all of us at Path to Positive Communities and ecoAmerica, we want to say thank you so much for listening to this terrific story from Utah today. And we hope that you're inspired too. Stay well, stay safe. See you soon.